Hi, my name is Aislinn Primmer, and today I'll be presenting part of my honours research on the behaviour of native Australian bees across an urban to suburban gradient. Animal pollinators are key to ecosystem functioning, required for the reproduction of over 75% of flowering plants. But widespread reports of bee declines are a growing concern. Declines have been attributed to habitat loss and fragmentation, urban heat island effect, agrochemical use, and non-native species. These factors are all associated with urbanisation. At the community and population level, urbanisation can lead to declines in bee abundance and species richness. But what about the effects at the individual level? How might their behaviour change in response to urbanisation? Several studies comparing the behaviour of vertebrates across an urbanisation gradient find urban animals to be bolder, more explorative, and more active than rural conspecifics. However, similar studies on invertebrates are comparatively lacking. I aim to address this gap in my study where I investigate the behaviour across an urbanisation gradient in native Australian bees. As individual behaviour of bees likely shapes pollination, potential effects of urbanisation on behaviour could have important implications on pollination services. As such, the aim of my study was to compare behaviour between native bees of urban and suburban origin, including boldness, activity, and exploratory behaviour. I collected a total of 57 native bees by hand. The apparatus used for all behavioural experiments was a 14 by 14 by 5 centimetre box with a piece of plexiglass covering the top to allow filming of insect behaviour. The behavioural assays were 3-minute long open field tests and were conducted under field conditions. Each bee was tested twice with 24 hours between trials. From these trials, I measured the latency to the first movement after it was released into the apparatus as a measure of boldness. I scored the time spent walking and flying as a measure of activity, and the number of zones visited as a measure of exploratory behaviour, where the apparatus was virtually divided into zones with a 3x3 grid. I used linear mixed models to test for an effective urbanisation level on behaviour, including urbanisation level, temperature, weather, and time of day as fixed effects, and individual bee ID and site ID as random effects. Figure 2 shows time on the y-axis and activity type, walking, flying, or total on the x-axis. As you can see, city origin bees in orange spent significantly more time walking and flying in total than suburban bees in blue. There was an imbalance in the number of males and females from each urbanisation level. There was no significant difference in the latency to first movement, boldness, or the number of zones visited, exploratory behaviour. A major finding from my study was that urban bees spent significantly more time active in total than suburban bees. Urban areas are associated with a high proportion of impermeable surfaces and low vegetation coverage. This means there are less available nesting sites for ground nesting bees and less appropriate foraging locations. So we might expect more active bees to have better dispersal ability, making them more competitive for these limited resources in urban areas. Interestingly, there was an imbalance in the number of each sex collected from urban and suburban sites. Most urban bees were males, while the opposite was true of suburban bees. This could have influenced the results, as males may be more active than females. Unlike females, males aren't confined to a nest and therefore may display higher activity to locate foraging sites and seek mating opportunities. If this were the case, higher activity observed among urban bees than suburban bees within this study may reflect an effect of sex rather than urbanisation level on activity. I found no significant effect of urbanisation level on boldness or exploratory behaviour. Frequent disturbance and higher levels of competition have previously been attributed to higher boldness and exploratory behaviour observed in some urban animals. Disturbances and competition may be present in similar levels across urban and suburban habitats. Therefore, investigating native bee behaviour across a wider urbanisation gradient, where disturbances and competition level may vary more, could reveal differences in boldness and exploratory behaviour. To summarise, native Australian bees of urban origin were significantly more active than suburban conspecifics, but this may have been influenced by the sex of the bees, and it is difficult to separate these individual effects. To better understand the effect of urbanisation on native bee behaviour, similar studies should study bees across a wider urban gradient from urban to rural habitats. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.